Today in the photo kitchen, we're getting a bit sexy. So pour yourself a glass of wine, light some candles, and send the kids to their room. Because we're talking about the size, speed, and endurance of memory cards. Welcome to episode 72 of Photo Kitchen, and I am your humble host, MD Welch, and today we're talking about the titillating topic of memory cards. Wait. Before you move on to the next video, understand that memory cards have a huge impact in your workflow, and using faster, newer cards might radically change your experience. But you might also be spending too much money on memory cards for very little impact in your day-to-day operations. I've recently upgraded my cameras, but was trying to use my older memory cards. I was first hesitant to spend money on new memory cards on top of the cost of the new camera purchases. But with the increase in both megapixels and frame rates, things were starting to slow down. I will be testing the speed of those old SD cards to new cards, one pair from SanDisk and another from Sony. While they no longer make my older model SD cards for purchase, the closest budget deal I could find at the time of this recording had a $100 difference per card. Since I have two memory card slots in each camera and two exact same model cameras, that results in a $400 extra cost for faster cards. But what do I get for all that extra cost and speed? I want to stress this is not some crazy hyper-scientific test, but a real-world look at real performance differences. This is about saving seconds, maybe minutes of time, not a simple 2% speed increase. I want to know if the cost difference is justified between holding on to my old cards or going with new. But before we dive into speed versus monetary investment, let's back up and talk a little bit about best practices for memory cards. Always check the specification of the card slot of your camera and match that to the camera memory card specification. A newer, faster card might not improve anything if the camera slot is rated at a lower speed. Ideally, you want the card to be the same spec and speed as the card slot, so you're getting the most out of the technology and possibly saving yourself some money. Also, if the camera is using dual card slots, check and see if both slots are the same speed. Some companies will not only have different speed specs for each slot, with one being much faster than the other, but some manufacturers have different card types for each slot. In a perfect world, dual slot cameras would use the same card type and speed for each slot. So let's get back to my card tests. I have two Sony a7R Mark IVs in the kitchen, and these cameras have the same card type and speed for both slots. The slots are rated for a higher speed capacity SD-XC Mark II cards. My old cards are SanDisk SD-XC Model 1 cards at 128 gigabytes of storage. I've decided to upgrade to SanDisk SD-XC Series 2 cards, keeping the same 120 gigabytes of storage, and because I found them at the same price, I also bought Sony Tough Card models at the same 120 gigabyte size. I'm curious if Sony has any special sauce in the cards that makes them run faster on Sony models, or if it's just another brand option to choose from. You can see that the old memory cards say 90 megabytes per second, while the new ones are listed at 300 megabytes per second. But what does that really mean in day-to-day work as a photographer? Our first test is simple. How fast does it take to fill and clear the buffer on a camera? I have the old SD cards in one of my Sonys and the new SanDisk cards in the other. Both Sonys have the same settings with a shutter speed of 1/4000th of a second to get a high frame rate from the cameras, which will fill up the buffer faster. I'm also shooting uncompressed RAW to both cards, so this will really test the right speeds. Let's put up the clock and hold down the shutter button. We're looking for two things. First, when the word slow appears in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, this means the camera is right into the buffer and you'll see a significant slowdown in the frame rate of shooting. I will release the shutter button the moment I see the word slow, so the camera could write the images to the card. Next is how long the counter in the upper part of the screen takes to reach 0, meaning the buffer is cleared and you could shoot normally. I do want to point out when the buffer is trying to clear, you still can shoot, but depending on the camera processing and card speed, things might be slower and certainly the buffer will fill up faster. As you can see, not only do the older SanDisk cards hit the buffer sooner, but they take forever to clear compared to the newer cards. The new SanDisk cards clear the buffer at around 23 seconds, while the old cards are still trying to clear. This will actually take a total of 1 minute and 15 seconds. If you're shooting any content that requires high frame rates or you're shooting a lot in a short period of time, this might legitimize the extra cost of the cards. No one wants to tell a subject they need to wait while the camera clears the buffer. Hell, no one wants to tell a subject what a buffer is or how card speed plays a role in it. I'm actually shocked you made it this far in the video. So do Sony native cards have an advantage over the faster SanDisk cards? As we could see, not a radical difference, about a second faster for the Sony. The next test is all about read speed, or how long it takes to download the images from the camera to the computer. I no longer use a card reader in my workflow, and since I have different types of cards, it's a more controlled test just to plug the camera into the computer. I'll shoot 20 images on each card and then import them into Lightroom Classic with no presets applied and using minimum preview settings. The old SanDisk cards take about 40 seconds to import, with the new SanDisk cards taking about 20 seconds, about half as long. The Sony actually performed a little bit slower here, taking about 22 seconds. Even if you're not shooting images like a 1980s action hero, the import speed difference might have a big impact on your workflow. And the last test is what, if any, impact the cards make on shooting tethered to a computer. I will shoot 20 images again using Capture One with no presets or development settings. I have the camera recording the raw images to both cards as well as the images to the computer. As to be expected at this point, from the first press of the shutter button until the 20th image appeared, the old SD cards performed the slowest at around 54 seconds. The new SanDisk cards came in at just over 19 seconds, and the Sony brand did a little over 19.5 seconds. So outside the obvious newer cards are faster, what does this all really mean? Well, first, if you're shooting a lot of images in a short period of time, making the extra investment to put the optimum speed cards in your new camera makes sense, especially if you're shooting action shots and can't afford to miss a moment due to the buffer clearing. Even if you're not shooting action work or a high amount of photos in a short period of time, the import and tethered speed improvements are worth looking at. But there's actually a totally different takeaway here, and that is if you're on a budget, shooting product work, landscapes, maybe portrait shoots that don't require a high amount of images in a short period of time, or you really don't care about import speeds, you could save some money on slower, older cards as long as they're compatible with your camera. Because why spend money in an area when you don't need to? While I am personally seeing radical speed improvements, I have to ask myself, was it worth $400? And what would that speed improvement cost be worth to you? If you are going to upgrade your cards, make sure to consult your manual and use the right spec card. Different manufacturers and card speeds will produce different results. Again, a faster card doesn't mean faster results if you're not matching it to the camera speed. I hope this answers the burning question about cost and card speeds, and I hope you also made it to the end of this video. Please give it a like, a comment, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Until next time, this is MD Welch, wishing you all the best from the Photo Kitchen.